Hi guys, my name's Alana. Welcome back to my channel. On this channel, I post mental health content every week. If you're interested, please subscribe and press the thumbs up if you enjoy these types of videos, and I hope you enjoy. For this week's video, I'm going to be talking about a side effect or a symptom that is common with people who have borderline personality disorder, also known as BPD or EUPD. And that is going to be on the topic of splitting. So a brief overview, if you don't know what BPD is, I have more in-depth videos on my YouTube channel about what BPD is. Today I want to talk about something that is more coming from my own personal experience. I am diagnosed with BPD, borderline personality disorder, and this is a very common symptom or trait that a lot of people can struggle with, and it's definitely not a symptom that everyone struggles with because obviously you only have to meet 5 out of the 9 criteria to actually be diagnosed with BPD, which means that obviously you can imagine there are a lot of combinations of symptoms and not everyone is going to experience the same illness the same way. But basically, splitting, known in BPD, is kind of a colloquial term. It is a term that's kind of been coined by people, I suppose, who live with BPD. It's not necessarily a clinical term, like it wasn't, come up with, it's not in the DSM, but it is kind of a term that describes where somebody will often shift from idealizing a person or a thing to going the complete opposite, because with BPD you often have very black and whites, and so they'll shift from idolizing a person to they call it devaluing. So it's kind of where, as it sounds, you're removing value from that thing or that person. By the time with personality disorders too, like you're not really aware that you're doing things until maybe someone else points it out. And that was the other thing I was going to say, was that by doing therapy, I've had a lot of obviously therapists and stuff over time, with situations, start to point things out to me and be like, do you think that you're maybe doing this, or I can see maybe this is how you behaved. And then over time you start to realize, oh, I actually am doing that. There is a pattern there. With BPD, generally it does follow a bit of a pattern because it's a very invasive kind of thing. Like it really affects all areas of your life, obviously. But moving on to some ways that you can overcome this, because as always, I want to give you some advice, I suppose, and some tips to try to rein this in a bit, because it can get really extreme. Like it really depends on the person. Like some people, like I said, have BPD and literally don't even struggle with this. So like don't feel like, oh, like I don't struggle with that, I mustn't have BPD. Like it's just, this can also come from trauma. I feel like this is, BPD is often, not always, but often caused from a lot of trauma, having trauma in your life. And so, I think that this trait for me has definitely come out of a lot of really negative experiences in childhood. That if you experience this, that you realize that it doesn't make you a bad person and you're not alone, because I think growing up, I never knew why I would do things like this. And I think when I got diagnosed with BPD and I actually finally came to accept the diagnosis and understand what BPD was, I realized that I was actually doing this behavior and I wasn't aware of it. So splitting for me has happened a lot of the time in friendships where I've always struggled to have friendships to begin with for numerous reasons. But, I find it quite difficult because it starts off with the friendship. This can happen romantically or in friendships. Like this can happen across a whole bunch of things. But, it's where you kind of really feel like you connect with a person and you see all their positive traits and you see them, and you can start to really put them up on a bit of a pedestal, and you think that they're like going to be like your best friend, and you get really excited and you're like, oh my gosh, like this person is amazing, I really connect with this person, and like they're going to be my best friend, and like you start getting like really excited or whatever, and kind of really hoping and like putting all your kind of like thoughts into this person, like thinking that they're amazing and stuff, and you may even tell everyone else like how amazing they are and stuff like that. And then, you know, what can happen is that person may do something, it may or may not be their fault. I'm not, that it doesn't really matter, because it could be a situation that maybe isn't really real, but you're perceiving it is, or it could actually be something the other person has done. But regardless, they'll do something, and then you suddenly switch to, you know, being like totally like, oh my gosh, this person is amazing, to almost basically on the opposite end, where it can get to the point where you're like, I hate that person. And, you know, you completely cut them off, you may ghost them, you may just like not start acting really different to them, or you may like, depending on what type of BPD you have, like my BPD is definitely more of the quiet BPD, so I won't necessarily go up to a person and confront them in like a rude way or anything, but like I'll kind of give them more of like the ghosting, like cut them off, silent treatment type thing. So I'll just like stop talking to the person, cut them off in any way I can, just like avoid them at all costs, that type of thing. Because I am annoyed at them, or they've done something and I get really upset or I get really hurt, and then suddenly I'm like, no, I don't want to be friends with them, like because they did this. And I'll tell like, you know, like my close family or whatever, like stuff, and be like, no, I'm not being their friend anymore. And like if people try to like reason with me, I'm very like stuck on that other you know, that other kind of opposite end of the spectrum. So you can see how it can be very black or it can be very white. So it could be either completely on this spectrum, like this end of the spectrum, or it can be totally the opposite. So that's really what it is. Like that's kind of an example. I hope that made sense. But you know, some other examples can be like if you were I heard a story. This story always sticks with me because I actually think it's kind of a funny story, but obviously it wouldn't have been funny for the person experiencing it. But I heard this story one time of this lady who broke up with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend had just published a book, and she was at the bookstore, and she didn't know that her ex-boyfriend had a book out. She was just there to buy a book, right? And she came across his book in the aisle, and this lady who had BPD grabbed the books off the shelf and started ripping pages out of them and destroying the books in the bookstore. And the security like had to come get her and be like, hey, like you can't do that in the store, you know. And this lady was just like going off, right? So that might be like a really extreme kind of example, but that just shows that like that lady obviously had, you know, BPD that was expressed in a more outwards kind of way, whereas with mine it would be a bit more like subtle, and you know, it can just come across maybe as me just being rude. I mean, you know, and I can acknowledge that like, yeah, it's definitely not the most mature way to deal with things, and I have worked on it a lot, but it's definitely hard because with BPD, like it's very much your natural instinct to, that is what you're going to do. And it doesn't happen all the time, but like it does definitely happen. You know, it has definitely happened with a lot of relationships, and um, yeah, it makes it really difficult because it's very hard to not see that person as all good or all bad, because BPD, kind of like the lens that you view the world, is very much either something is all good or something's all bad, and it's really hard to find that like middle ground. Um, so yeah, that is another example, and I always think of that example because that is the that is a really good example to show. Like I said, like people can have different almost types of BPD where it, you know, will come out in different actions. But it can obviously become a problem in employment situations. You know, if you get into a fight or if you have an altercation or something with another colleague, it can cause problems with family and communicating within that. It can cause problems in romantic relationships. I mean, I'm not in a relationship, but I can imagine how like that would definitely be a thing that will come up probably a lot if you struggle with BPD. It can be really hard to know that you're doing it. And it wasn't even until I actually did DBT therapy and we were talking about like the communication kind of like interpersonal aspect of it, I didn't really realize that I had done a lot of these things, because obviously when I was younger and I was a teenager, I wasn't diagnosed with BPD. I didn't even know what it was. So I just thought that was just something. I just always felt like I was a really terrible person because, you know, I would be like, what the heck? Like, even as a kid, like, I would go from really, really loving someone to just being like, literally, like, I hate this person. And I would do it to family members. I'd do it to, and I'd be like really like vocal about it and stuff. And I think like growing up, like I felt a lot of guilt about it because I was like, what the heck? Like, why am I going around saying to people I hate you and like, stuff like that, like doing all these actions to kind of like get back at people and stuff. And I'd be really confused as to why I was doing it. And I was like, like in general, like I'm such a caring and compassionate person. Um, but when it comes to like that aspect of my BPD, like it definitely can start to come out when it's, put under stress, I suppose, like interpersonal problems. All symptoms of BPD, everything kind of interlinks, and unfortunately, like, stress can kind of cause this, or so stress can cause interpersonal relationship problems, or interpersonal relationship problems can cause stress. And when you get stressed, you can start to dissociate, you can get psychosis, psychotic type features can even come into play like when it's extreme. So there's definitely like a lot of other factors that will start to be affected by splitting. And obviously, like if you don't learn to work through those interpersonal relationship problems, you might find it really hard to keep friendships, and you're going to end up getting hurt, and maybe, the other people are too. So I'm going to, tell you some ways that I have kind of worked through this. To be honest, I still struggle with it because like it's just part of the disorder. Like it's not something that's gonna like completely go away, but there are definitely things that you can do, and I find at least being aware of it is a really great start. So number one, you really need to put a little bit of distance between your reaction time, because with BPD you're very impulsive and you tend not to think before you act, and things can get out of control extremely fast. You can be fine 1 minute, then the next, it's like everything has become a mess. So I found with me, it's really important to try to like slow down that initial kind of reaction phase. This can be really hard when it's like your family, because I find obviously the closer the person is, for me, the less kind of the harder it is to restrain in that kind of impulsiveness, because I'm close to that person, which means I feel more comfortable around them, which means that these traits are going to come out a bit more. So yeah, but I would say like if you're living at home and this is starting to happen with like a partner or family members, make sure that you get some space, remove yourself from the situation, whether it's digitally or physically. Give yourself time, because you need to, bring those really high intense emotions and feelings down from like a 10 to, like a 4 or whatever, so you can actually have the capability to start to think about the situation a bit more logically, and instead of just having everything like firing off and like getting really crazy and stuff, you need time to calm down so that you can actually, deal with it in a way that's gonna be productive for you. You can do this by walking away from the person and saying, look, I need some space right now, please, just to talk, to think. You can, if it's like over email or whatever, you need to just like go and put your phone somewhere and maybe go for a walk, go for a drive, if you're safe to do so. Maybe you need to just like avoid that person or that thing for a few days so that you can, because if you know that if you see the person, you're gonna get really mad, like you need to like, give yourself some space. My second tip would be to have a idea of what it feels like in your body when you are getting into that kind of impulsive, like upset or angry. It doesn't have to be anger, like it can be you're upset by something or hurt, but what does it feel like in your body, like physically? So I've done this in therapy before, where you sit and you think about like what does it feel like for you. So when you're having conflict with somebody, what do you feel like? So do you get really sweaty? Like, do you get a stomach ache, or do you feel really anxious? Do you have a panic attack? Do you start crying? Do you start yelling? Do you tend to react physically? Do you tend to react verbally? And you need to figure out, like, how does it feel to you in your body, and how do you react from that? Because knowing that will actually help you, because if you know that you start to get um really anxious and really panicked, and you're going to have a panic attack, maybe you need to take, as soon as you start feeling like that, you need to take some medication, like some PRN, if you have that, and you're allowed to take that. Like, that isn't a good idea. Maybe you need to go and have a sleep. Maybe you need to go, if you're getting really like sweaty and stuff, and like you're starting to feel really like worked up, maybe you need to go have a freezing cold shower. So you can use a lot of the other DBT strategies, such as TIP, which is like changing your body temperature. So you can have you can hold ice cubes, you can go for a cold shower, you can do some intense exercise where you run on the spot. Maybe you need to go into the gym just like for a bit, do some weights or go for a run. You can what's the other one? And you can do some intermittent breathing exercises, to try to calm your nervous system down. So yeah, it's all about trying to get your mind a bit clearer and in a more stable place. So then you can actually think about, okay, the next point, which is, what are some productive things that I can do now? Sometimes it is the other person's fault, to be honest, and it doesn't matter what you do, that person doesn't want to resolve it. That's okay, but what are you going to do about it? Like, are you going to let that really get to you, or are you just going to go, you know what, I can't control that person's actions or what they've done, and I acknowledge that you are hurt by it, or you are upset, you are really offended, or whatever it is, but then like go and journal about it or let it out in a healthy way. Those are the three things that I would say to do. That's what I normally do. For me also, I find it really helpful to talk to somebody as well, but just be careful who you talk to, because if you talk to someone who is too close to you, they might kind of agree with you and kind of feel the feelings that you're feeling already, and it may actually do the opposite, where it may make it worse, or they may go and do something on your behalf. So if you have like a therapist or somebody who's a bit more objective, that is always so good. Like, I really like to do that and ask them, what do you think? And I always kind of listen to what they have to say, and then they'll usually pick up on maybe some patterns of the way I'm acting and say, like, I've noticed this. And because I've been with this therapist that I have now, like, for instance, for like, I've had her for over a year, this lady, so she knows me really well, and like, I know that if she's saying something, she's actually like, normally 9 times out of 10 she's right. That is in short what splitting is, and some situations and ways that I would deal with it. If you have any other ideas, leave it down below. This can be such a difficult one, and to be honest, I don't know if it really ever gets that much easier, because you're always going to have these type of situations happen. But I think the best way is to just keep practicing and have those tools there, so okay, if this happens, this is what I'm going to go do, and test those things out and see if they help. So thank you for watching my video, and I hope that it helped you. If you struggle with this and BPD, I'm really sorry, but I hope that you can use some of these tips. And yeah, if you want to know more about BPD or mental health issues, I have a lot of videos on my channel if you want to check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!